All right, Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening and shalom. Welcome to another episode of Liberty and Friends. It's Sunday evening at 8 p.m. And you know what that means. We're here to wrap up the news week that was. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends, as I said. Yeah, I'm having a little bit of an issue hearing myself. Oh, there you go. Goodness me. Now I can actually hear myself. Uh, to make sure that you guys can actually hear me. Welcome to it. As I said, it is Liberty and Friends. Remember, this is the one long format show here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. But even with that being said, tonight will be a slightly shorter show. We usually go on for 90 minutes, but tonight we're going to do 45 minutes because really we're covering one issue, one broad issue as it may be. And boy, oh boy, do I not have a super panel, as I said here tonight. People who literally stood by you, the faith, flag, family, and freedom type South African, and stood by you at a time where politicians and really the political elites were grifting off of that spicy cough. And yes, unfortunately, I'm still calling it the spicy cough because YouTube and and Facebook still are demonetizing and even banning channels for referring to the C word, if you know what I mean, the C word with a number. But so we're going to call it the spicy cough, or at least owl. And but tonight on Liberty and Friends, I wanted to bring together organizations that literally have been fighting the good fight. Guys who stood with you as politicians literally gave themselves powers that they'd never given themselves before, powers that they'd never been accorded before under the Constitution. They subverted at times, even went around in crafty ways, constitutional checks and balances in order to grift on the one hand of this particular virus. And I say grift on purpose because boy, oh boy, did they not make money hand over fist at time as they clamored to make a quick buck off of this pandemic on the one hand. On the second hand, they grifted for power. So if they grifted on money on the one hand, they also grifted for power. And, Milton Friedman, the great economist, the Nobel Prize winning economist out of the Chicago School of Thought, had once said that, he had never known a temporary government program that didn't become permanent. Now, it was a poor way of paraphrasing him, but effectively, he made the argument that anything any politician or government comes out and says is temporary, always becomes permanent. And in this instance, these temporary powers, these temporary emergency powers, we always knew, or those of us who actually pay attention to how politicians and the political elites work, we always knew that these temporary powers would become permanent. And boy, oh boy, did they not show us that they were willing to make that attempt. But don't take it from me. Take it from the people who, as I said, literally stood with you. Organizations like AfriForum, the Institute of Race Relations, Dear SA, doing amazing, amazing work. And of course, the chaps over at Panda and many, many others. And I must reiterate, I did invite everybody, including the Liberty Fighters Network, who, if you remember, very early in the spicy cough, I'd had them on this show to explain what they had done insofar as their court action. If you remember, Reno de Beer was the head honcho over at the Liberty Fighters Network. I didn't get any feedback from them, so unfortunately they will not be joining us. But hey, man, it's still a full house up in here. And even as I say this, two things: hit that like button, and of course, share the stream. And the second thing, take your mask off. Take your mask off. Take your mask off. I don't know if you missed vlog 137 where I showed you how South Africans are doing exactly that. They're taking that damn face nappy off their faces, and we're seeing that beautiful smile again. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends, speaking about the Friends panel, the all vaunted this week Friends panel. Let me bring on the fellas right now. I'll begin, of course, with I'll call it the second home of mine, my good friends over at the Institute of Race Relations. I'm talking, of course, about Upra Gabriel Krauser, head of campaigns out in that part of the world. Brazo, your mask is off. Welcome to it.
Bah! Dude, what a delight. What an absolute delight. Thank you, Sihle. it's some good news this week, and it's good to be able to celebrate it with you.
Absolutely, absolutely, my brother, and welcome to it. Very, very good to have you on the show. Another friendly, familiar face, someone who, man, oh man, I know you guys love seeing this homie. He is 1/3 at the or at those fellas over at the Man Patria podcast. He is their head honcho, also in that part of the world. I'm talking, of course, about Upra Dumo. Denga, Dumo, Baba. Good evening.
Hey, Sihle, how you doing? I'm glad that the masks are off, and I'm looking to have a great conversation today.
Absolutely, absolutely, and man, I'm really rattling out the head honchos tonight. Another head honcho over at the organization Dear SA, and boy oh boy, are we not going to have that chat with him because he's been on the show before. We've telegraphed even a few of these developments when he was on the show the last time. I'm talking, of course, about Upra Rob Hutchinson from Dear SA. Rob, good evening.
How are you doing, Sihle? How are you, Gabriel? How are you, Dumo? Yeah, it's good times and good to be on the show to brag about them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Victory is sweet, fellas. I do hope it's not short-lived, but victory is damn sweet. And speaking about someone who knows, goodness me, this guy, oh man, am I going to not prime the introduction of this fella? This guy knows the meaning of securing victory. He is the kind of guy who I really always say I will take to war, quite literally. He is a legal eagle and the mind really behind a lot of the arguments that have actually formally been made in court. He is from Herta Spies, the law firm Upra, Daniel Earloff. There he is on screen. Brother, good evening.
Hello, gents. Lovely to be here in, some esteemed colleagues today. I am quite looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very nice to have you, brother. And as I quickly fix my little sound machine majiggy here to my right, I'm going to bring on who is coming to us via telephone. And I must quickly just add a little proviso here. Guys, he's in the middle of the bush. He's currently cooking dinner for his family, so he will not be with us for very long. But goodness me, it would have been a travesty if I didn't have him on. And I'm talking, of course, about, how do I prime this man? He literally gave me on the one hand, the intellectual arguments, and on the other, the actual hard data-based arguments around why a lot of the responses by politicians were absolute trash when they came to fighting the spicy cough. He has risked a lot for us, the ordinary citizen, and we owe him and his organization quite a lot. And I'm talking, of course, about Upra Nick Hudson, the head honcho over at Panda Analytics. Bruh, Nick, good evening.
Good evening, Sihle. Wonderful to be with you again. And yep, there is stuff to celebrate, but we are running onto the field of a much larger battle. Mm-hmm. And I look forward to having a chat to you about that sometime.
Absolutely. In fact, let's have that conversation tonight. And I'm just going to ask the moderators just to make sure that they can hear Nick and that they didn't just have a quiet moment there. Maybe we as panelists could hear him, but everybody else couldn't. I'm just going to wait for the likes of Moonchild, etc., just to let me know if they could hear Nick with a quick confirmation. And as we wait for that, just a quick reminder to you. Remember, this show also includes you, dear viewers. So make sure you get your comments in. We're going to be keeping an eye on those as the show goes on tonight. And of course, get your hit those likes in, pardon me, as I always say. All right, Gregory Hurst, I see you. Bruce Grobler, baie dankie vir die informatie. Is dit die woord in Afrikaans? You guys can hear Upra Nick. All right, guys, let's get straight into the conversation. Goodness me, it's so rare, guys, on this channel to have a win, a significant win that, whether by hook or crook or whether they care to admit it or not, really was off of the back of immense pressure, multi-pronged pressure that the state had endured over the past 2.5 years. I suppose Nick, let me begin with you. We eventually did find out how long 14 days to stop the spread took. It's 2.5 years, homie.
Yeah. 2.5 years, and the crazy thing about this is in that 14-day period, we managed to ascertain that this was indeed a spicy cough, that there was no need to do anything that we hadn't done in the previous 50 years when it came to dealing with respiratory viruses that looked a little nastier than the average. But, ahead the world went into this absolutely absurd state. And absurd is a word we're going to have to improve upon. We need something that's a little stronger than that, because the story of how a disease that presented negligible threat to healthy people under the age of 70 was portrayed as a deadly virus is quite an extreme one. And as we begin to pick through the architecture of this whole pandemic of hysteria, not a pandemic of a virus, we have been dealing with a pandemic of hysteria. It becomes clearer and clearer that all of our public health organizations, all of our governments failed us. They have been infiltrated by pharmaceutical firms and by people with crazy ideas about pandemic preparedness that cause us to misprioritize all of our healthcare expenditure. And it has caused enormous harm to the world, harm way, way, way beyond anything that this virus could potentially have done.
And Nick, even as you say this, I must harp back to that first episode we did, Nick. It's so many months back now. Pardon me, it's 2 years back actually, when we actually first entered the lockdown, and you guys called it back then. And you literally said, you know what, we're literally embarking on a very a downward spiral, effectively, of policy based on what was then, if you remember, Nick, those projections. 500,000 South Africans, we were told, are going to die. It's going to be doom and gloom. It's going to rain frogs. The locusts are going to come. Big Daddy, you're a Jew. Make sure you step outside. Paint your front door with red lamb's blood because, this thing's coming. The spicy cough will kill you, fatty. It's going to kill you, fatty. I have to remember that. We were basically told it's doom and gloom.
No, and it was crazy, unscientific stuff. I mean, when we think back to this era, we will remember things like the cloth face masks, the perspex shields, the social distancing, all of the elbow bumping and hand sanitizing. And in the fullness of time, it will become clear to everybody, it's now clear to a significant subset of people, that none of those measures had any hope at all of doing anything to manage a respiratory virus outbreak. We have absolutely zero evidence for what is known as droplet and fomite transmission, which is the theory that launched all these crazy measures that cost probably billions of dollars, maybe tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars, really, when you look at the long-term effects of the measures. And it will strike people as completely bizarre that the world took these ideas on in the absence of any evidence that they worked at all. And even though the existing guidelines from any number of organizations, including the World Health Organization, ruled such policies out. They all said, look, when you get hit by a respiratory virus outbreak, we don't do quarantining of healthy people. We don't do cloth masks. We don't do hand washing and elbow bumping. That was what the guidelines said. And the amazing thing is that one of those guidelines, the World Health Organization's own one, was updated just a few months before the outbreak of COVID. And yet they went ahead and embarked without any kind of robust scientific evidence on the most extraordinary set of measures, the most extraordinarily destructive set of measures that the world has ever seen. It's been the biggest breach of sanity and logic and reason that I believe that the world has ever seen.
And, even as I say that, guys, I must open it up to the rest of you. My apologies. I had to begin with Nick only because he has those particular pressures at the moment. And really, Nick, we appreciate your time, brother. If you need to hop off at any time, please feel free to. But I'm in conversation, of course, with Upra Nick Hudson from Panda, Daniel Earloff, the legal eagle behind a lot of this body, if you will, of jurisprudence. I think that's the word, Daniel, that fought these lockdowns and the asinine measures. Rob Hutchinson, the man that brought South African voices to the fore insofar as speaking truth to power to those politicians who are grifting off of the spicy cough. Dumo Denga, of course, host of the Man Petra show, who brought you a lot of these arguments also on his show. And of course, Gabriel Krauser, the man himself who led campaigns on behalf of the IRR against a lot of the nonsense. Welcome to it. This is Libertarian Friends. Please do hit that like button. Daniel, let me come to you because I think the conversation naturally flows insofar as saying the legal side of things became incredibly important in that regard, because really that's all South Africans really have, insofar as how we, besides voting on a political front, legally is the only other measure really we get to engage those who are in power. Let me begin here. This is what we saw, Daniel, this week. Remember, Libertarian Friends always looks at what was topical in the week that was. And this is, of course, the image that sparked the show, that sparked this topic. And boy, oh boy, did not even see the nation rejoice. This notice, this government notice, signed by a one Dr. Pahla, the Minister of Health, basically saying, hey man, I give up. It's all over. The grift is over. Take your masks off. Stop the spacing. You are free, Excalibur. Of course, I'm paraphrasing terribly there with a lot of creative license. But Daniel, it is effectively what kicked this all off.
Yes, I mean, completely. I perhaps just to clarify, although I'd like to take as much credit of this as I can, but the court battles are only sort of one battlefield, right, where we fight these fights and where we have fought these fights during the past 2 years. It's obviously potentially a very effective one, but you need the campaigns, you need the public participation, you need the discussion in the media. It really is you need sort of a polycentric approach to try to achieve what we did achieve in the end. But it's not the end of the fight at all. I think it's only actually beginning now, although I think this has been a major blow for government. It's going to be very, very difficult to have this gap in regulations and to later come and try to justify the regulations. But perhaps just some inside info on sort of what's been happening with these cases. So our firm acted on behalf of AfriForum and DSA. We brought a case in the beginning of May, or sort of middle May, against these health regulations. A bunch of other organizations soon thereafter also brought their own cases: Solidarity, the trade union, the Liberty Fighters Network, and Sakaliga. And all these cases were due to be heard at the end of July, within a month's time, the 25th, 26th, and 27th of July. And the minister was supposed to file an answering affidavit, basically justifying and explaining why these health regulations should be in place. That was due on the 17th of June. So that's literally last week, Friday, not the past Friday, the Friday before. And the minister wrote on that day, or the minister's legal team wrote and said, can we please just get until Wednesday, the 22nd, to file our answering affidavit? And coincidentally, on the 22nd, rather than filing an answering affidavit, we saw this repeal of the health regulations, which is no coincidence. I mean, what we got in the court case and the papers that came out from the minister's own record, the minister's own court papers that were filed, it was absolutely damning. I mean, the minister, from the record, it was clear the minister didn't listen to his own advisory committee, the MAC committee. The minister didn't listen to legal advice. The minister didn't listen to 310,000 South Africans objecting to these health regulations. And I really think they had no other choice than to repeal these regulations. And it would not have been possible had it not been for the court case, for the facilitation of hundreds of thousands of people objecting to the health regulations, had it not been for all of the work that preceded this final repeal of the health regulations. So it really, I do have to say, I think it's a massive team effort, but I really do think we need to realize that the fight is starting now. Currently, there are still health regulations that are open to public comment, and we need to ensure that those don't come into force.
And we'll definitely speak about those. Hang tight on that particular one. But guys, Daniel makes a very important point here, and perhaps it even pushes me towards Rob in that sense. Insofar as the public got an opportunity, an avenue in that teamwork spirit that Daniel speaks to about rather. The public got an opportunity to have its voice heard quite literally in a wave, if you will, that I think shocked the politicians because they were so used to Rob being the only voice and, if anything, the loudest voice in the room, amplified by their chums in the corporate media. And, here you are, Rob, who facilitated, I think Daniel speaks of 300,000, maybe you'll correct me on the number, a flurry and a flood of voices who said, no ways, here is where we draw the line and no further.
Yeah, absolutely. It was 310,000 so far, and that number is still climbing by the day. And it's wonderful to see such public interaction and engagement on this issue. And you're absolutely correct. It was definitely a team effort. We actually don't want to take the credit for this because it is many groups and many individuals who've actually banded together on a common cause and see the dangers of this overreach by government. And as Dani says, this is definitely a good step forward, and it is the beginning of something that's great. That's definitely going to happen. Yeah, we are pursuing ahead with the court case regardless, and because it does involve the draft regulations that are still actually out for comment. And we mustn't forget that these can be implemented anytime government wants to. So we have to go to court to make sure that the proper procedures, public interaction and engagement, and parliamentary oversight is also adhered to when the government is making these decisions. Because it might not be for the spicy cough. I nearly said the C word there. Not just for the spicy cough. As we've seen, there's other talk on a new monkeypox, whatever that may be. And no doubt there will be other viruses and pathogens coming forward further down the line. So we have to make sure that these draft health regulations are not adopted to be permanent, because that places way too much power on one minister, and that is a dangerous place to be. That is truly the end of democracy. So what we're fighting for here is really democracy. Democracy must be adhered to, it must be followed, and the rules in the Constitution must be followed and obeyed by our so-called leaders.
Absolutely. And Gabriel, again, I think you complete the picture here to a large extent, insofar as people who've engaged the public at a mass level in order to bring those voices forward, people who've written, who've put out intellectual thought out there, helped people like me sharpen their arguments around why this had always been a bad idea. Concentrating power into the hands of a very small political elite in the name of fighting a virus, insofar as even it being a pandemic, was always going to be a bad response to something which we can all recognize was a virus that affected a lot of people, and we lost a lot of people. But again, the response, the amount of power, the dangers of all of that.
Yeah, Sihle. I've been looking back in my mind in the last day. It started out very jolly for me after Joe Partla's second letter came out. The first letter came out saying we're going to do this, and we tried applying our pressure as well. Then the second letter came out, the government gazette, saying we've taken this away. And then the next morning it was very jolly for me. I walked around a shopping mall in Johannesburg and saw people with their masks on, and I said, you don't have to wear that. And I could see them, they didn't believe me. And I said, no, it's Joe Partla, Minister of Health, this and that. And you start adding some details, you start adding some facts, you put it out in the government gazette. People can start hearing that you are saying a serious thing and start to get a little bit excited and start to pull it off. And it's not just about the mask, it's a symbol for so many ways in which the government has gotten in our face, literally. Ways in which people's livelihoods and lives have been badly undermined. If you look at excess mortality, it divorced the coronavirus waves last year. In other words, if you just look at the SAMRC's excess mortality figures, it looks very much like we're already seeing what was well predicted, that the major damage to the economy would mean that more people would be dying than otherwise would have been the case outside of the periods in which these respiratory viruses, COVID in particular, are going around. So it was very jolly in the beginning, and then it gets gloomy because you look back. And I look back to some of the first work that we did was drawing attention to the fact that 50 people died in police custody under suspicious circumstances in the first 3 weeks of the lockdown. And we were pushing that before Collins Causa, after Petrus Michels and Sibusiso Amos. But, it was important to give a sense to ordinary South Africans on the largest television channels, in the largest newspapers, that from the beginning, government abuses because of irregular regulations, unconstitutional regulations, and on top of it, bad implementation of the rules that there were, was literally killing people. And then, we had to get into the science. And it was a difficult place to get into because I'm not a scientist. None of my colleagues are particularly trained in medicine. We're just laymen. We're just like most viewers, I guess. But we have the time, thanks in large part to ordinary South Africans who bought into the campaigns, gave us their names, gave us their time, gave us their energy, gave us some of the resources so that we could look into the science and draw attention to the public to some of the most important facts. Number one most important fact was how many people were being infected and recovering without being acknowledged. A quarter after the first wave, half after the second wave, up to 80% after the third wave. I mean, on Shabir Mahdi's serological study, 80% of Gautengers over 50 years old were infected before Omicron. And then after Omicron, according to the latest blood bank study, 98% showing signs of immune boosting. That is the most damning fact on our government, which held us in lockdown for 818 days, 2 years, 2 months, and 27 days. One of the harshest lockdowns in the whole world. Banning open-toed shoes and hot food on the go at the supermarket, also liquor, also tobacco, also really banning most unskilled laborers from being able to get a job, locking people in difficult, highly dense environments. All of that restriction, 50 people being killed by the police or in police custody in the first 30 days. Despite all of that, we have the world's fastest spread of COVID, as far as I can tell. We incubated 2 variants of COVID, Omicron and Beta, as described in the cardinal descriptions of those things by the scientists who discovered them. Not said in the media, excepting sometimes by people like us. And we were. I think that is part of the contribution that we try to bring is scientific arguments, legal arguments, explaining to people what does the Constitution give you. It gives you the right to go to the government and say, you are not playing the way this game was set up to be played. You as a citizen have a right to do that. And it takes reminding because otherwise people see others around them get beaten down and they put their heads inside their shells and they try and leave it alone. And that's the great danger. Tyranny dominates when ordinary citizens do nothing. And we feel very privileged, as Daniel was saying, as Rob was saying, to be part of, and as Nick was saying, to be part of a bouquet, shall we say it nicely, of different flowers in South African civil society and sometimes different knives in the drawer out to cut the viciously stupid and nasty arguments based on nothing that resembles proper empirical science to lock this country down for 818 days.
Even as you say this, Dumo, I must come to you, and then I'll come to you, Nick, because I think you might have to hop off. That's before Nick is still with us. But Dumo, we've been saying this for a long time, that, hey, man, these politicians at this stage do not respect our intelligence. They actually think we're dumb as F, insofar as some of the arguments that we're making, at times even self-contradicting themselves at times. But really, when you have that amount of power, it became almost irrelevant for them. They just wanted to exercise it over us, the plebs.
Exactly. One of the things that I always said is that power is the most dangerous drug. Once you take it, you're going to always try to rationalize why you need to keep it. Like a drug addict. I mean, if you've seen what drug addicts, when they're recovering, they always say, oh, I need it. And look, Don't get me wrong. I've heard some rehab programs where they actually get people on other less dangerous drugs to get them off the more dangerous one. I do understand that does happen. But either way, you know, people are going to still rationalize to have it. And that is why I think this is why the government, and we saw basically in this pandemic, why, you know, the government having so much power is a dangerous thing. Then, I mean, we've seen it. I mean, they banned everything in sight. I mean, people every Sunday were hoping that their job was not going to be illegal the next day, you know? And that was the reality. Imagine you had a hair salon. They're like, sorry, you can't have a hair salon. How are you going to get money? Oh, we'll give you a 350 Rand grant. Wow. Imagine someone that's earning 5,000 Rand a month. Now that guy has to lose his job and get 350 bucks a month. And that's the government way of saying, yo, we care about you. I mean, it just shows you how this is almost like that Mary Antoinette moment where they were saying things like, you know, let them eat cake. It's ridiculous. And then they banned cigarettes. I don't smoke, but really, banned cigarettes for what? They were saying that because when these guys zoll, they pass the cigarette to each other, therefore it spreads. Oh my word. It's too much. It was too much. These guys had the most ridiculous reasons for everything. Then as Gabriel mentioned, they banned hot food, and then they banned certain type of clothing. Clothing that was going out of that for me. That was just like out of order. But that's the problem with these guys. They saw they had this power, and they thought, well, you know, let me do something with it. And look how far they ran with it. And I'm just glad that people actually went out and actually said, like, no, this has to stop. We're putting pressure on you guys. And now on top of that, remember, when the state of disaster ended, quote unquote, ended, they had a transition period where it kept the lockdown regulations for another month. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. It is, you know, you have to be like dumb to realize that, you know, that you couldn't see that what was actually going on. You really had to be blind and really had to be silly. And I just think that, you know, the government has overstepped their line. And you know what the worst thing is? The damage that they've caused, guys. People lost their jobs. People lost their lives on top of that. People lost their livelihoods and everything like that. And guess who's going to pay the price for it? Not Ramaphosa. Even though he was sitting there every week making your job illegal and stuff like that, he doesn't pay a price for being wrong. So I'm sorry. These guys need to pay the price for being wrong.
It has never surprised me. And, you know, I'm going to give Unik an opportunity just to give a final statement because we're in that last 15 minutes or so of the show. I did warn you at the beginning it'll be a shorter show this time. I'm in conversation with Nick Hudson from Panda, Gabriel Krauser from the Institute of Race Relations, Dumo Denga, host of the Man Patriot Show, Rob Hutchinson, of course, who's the head honcho over at Dear SA, and of course with Daniel Elof from Herta Spies, the Legal Eagles out in Pretoria. Before I come to you, Nick, in a moment, you know, it never ceases to amaze me how it was those in society who had the least to lose. It was those in society who had the least to lose who had the biggest voice in this particular issue. Those who, from the very beginning of March 2020, when the lockdown began and the grifting around the spicy cough happened, who never missed a salary, never missed a single salary throughout that entire period, were the loudest voice telling us, the ordinary people who are suffering, that how about you shut up, you poor person, you shut up, you individual who just lost their job, you shut up, you individual who doesn't know what to do with your kids who are now stuck at home because you don't have the money for childcare. You people shut up and you let us, the experts, guide you through the spicy grift. And, you know, it became rather concerning for me because no one measured the toll mentally that this was having on people. No one measured the toll financially this was happening on people. No one measured the toll emotionally that this was happening to people. Nick, I'm going to come to you, Nick, just to allow you a chance to hop on and then so you can actually get back to your camping, my brother. Nick, final comment from you. And in your final comment, what is Panda looking to do going forward? You know, are you guys closing shop? It's all over? Or can we expect more great work from you guys?
Sinclair, I'll start by telling a little story. Quite by accident, I had a chance to be part of a little social experiment. a couple of days before and a couple of days after the suspension of South Africa's mask mandate. I was flying. And a couple of days before, 90% of people on the plane dutifully donned their masks and sat through there looking like a bunch of absolute idiots. And a couple of days after, 10% of people sat there and donned their masks looking like a bunch of absolute idiots. Okay? How did that 80% swing happen? What it means is that of the people on those planes, actually only 10% of people believed that the masks were really good. These are the ultra compliant people, the people who will do basically anything the government tells them to do. If the government said, listen, you've got to wear your underpants on your head, those people would do it. Okay? The other 80% were just mindless compliers. They didn't really give it much attention. They knew in their heart of hearts that it didn't make a difference. So the moment the regulation was lifted, they abandoned the mask immediately, even though they knew from one day to the next that the actual threat of the virus hadn't changed. I mean, that I've got to credit them with. They would have known that. And that's the real thing that we have to think about, because it's not just about a few corrupt government officials and public health organizations that have been infiltrated by pharmaceutical interests who want to sell their products. This is about a lot of people just failing to stand up, failing to exhibit any form of courage and kind of character in the face of this sheer absurdity. Now, I'd love for any one of those 80% of people to explain to me how a tiny little particle, a viral particle, born in on an aerosol particle, which is way, way, way smaller than anything that your mask can possibly strain, you know. I'd love for them to explain to me why it was that they were sitting there like a bunch of morons wearing the mask. And then on one day, a government that they've known for years is untrustworthy. I mean, we've sat here this week, the same week that we suspended these regulations, we sat here reading the state capture report. Why did this government suddenly become so trustworthy that when they told you to adopt any of these elbow-bumping, fist-shaking antics, did they simply go along with it? It's a real question to be answered, and one which I think is at the heart of the problem that we face. Because I think there is a multi-layered answer to that question that goes very deep. And that's why I said in my opening remarks that we're just running onto the field. Because the set of problems that we have to deal with that are obviously in play as a result of the fact that so many people were gripped by the fear or simply prone to accepting whatever the government told them, went along with it all, and in the process did great harm to other people. That's the kind of question we are going to be answering, and that's where Panda is focusing its efforts right now. We're looking at the socio-political aspects of the whole COVID phenomenon, the spicy cough phenomenon, and we're looking at the various strains of things like pandemic preparedness that are coming at us thick and fast. The suggestion that we should be doing this again for the next threatening-looking particle that comes along, instead of actually concentrating on real healthcare threats like nutrition and well-being and obesity. And for me, this is a very deep set of questions, and it'll take us a while, many years, to just through them all and understand what it is that has happened and what we need to do to secure for ourselves that it never happens again.
Absolutely. Nick, I will let you go, my brother. I know you had indicated you have a poor signal out in that part of the world. That is, of course, Nick Hudson from the Panda Group. That's Panda Analytics, guys, who we will have on the show once again. I'm very happy that we've come full circle, Nick. You guys were one of the first voices I spoke to. If you remember that episode all the way back in 2020 March, was you and was it Brother Peter? I thought it was Castleton, if I'm not mistaken. All the way back then. And you called a lot of these things all the way back then. Nick, thank you. Appreciate your time. That's Nick Hudson, of course, from Panda. Guys, even
Thanks, Cecily.
oh, there you go. There you go.
And well done to the other guys on the show as well. I mean, it's just been a huge effort to get to this point, and there's going to be a lot more effort required, and I know that everybody here knows it.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's Nick Hudson, of course, from Panda. Guys, as we sort of taper off the show, there we go. That's the line cutting there. As we taper off the show, I really want us to focus on where we are now and where we're going. Pardon me. Rob indicated that they're still going to continue with the legal action in so far as that front, because we have. And Nick is quite right here. The abuse of power has become a drug that politicians are literally going to hold on to. And Dumont made that particular point too. So maybe let me begin with you, Rob, and then I'll come to Daniel. But you indicated, Rob, just as to conclude, you guys are going to pursue the legal action still. You're holding the course. What does that entail?
Well, first of all, there's no doubt that the true nature of government has definitely been exposed here, and that nature is definitely of an authoritative one. So we have to take a stand here, because as Duma said, once they get a taste of power, it goes. It's a drug. It's definitely addictive, and we know that our politicians are definitely addicted to that power. Well, any politician actually is. That's the whole aim of politics, is to get into power. And but the other great thing is that the public is far more aware of these issues and far more engaged now than ever before. It's actually been a blessing from civil society's point of view, is that the public are now far more involved in it. They're aware of civil society organizations and the power and impact that they can have on government processes and of them on themselves and their communities as such. So I think it's a great turning point for democracy. I think we have an opportunity now, a small window of opportunity now, to show that democracy, it can work. It can work if the people are more engaged and more involved, and if we realize that our so-called leaders are not in fact leaders, they are public servants. And I know I say that a lot because we need to realize that, and that the power remains with us. But Nick was talking about the fear, and I think the fear has largely subsided. It has definitely been due to the work of all organizations present here in educating the public and getting rid of that fear. And it's maybe, hopefully, say that critical thinking is re-emerging. We don't no longer take everything at face value, or trust the media, or trust our government. I think the trust in government is no longer existent, which again paves the way for civil society organizations to step in. And that's possibly why we are definitely going ahead with our case. It'll be against I'm sure Donnie will explain it in more legal detail, but we're definitely going ahead because we have to set a legal precedent in this case. And as I said, government can reinstate these regulations at any time that they feel, and we don't want to see that happen. It has to involve public consultation, the consultations with organizations and trusted experts as well. And we should have a say in who those experts are. They shouldn't just be government appointees. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we will take that to court. We're glad that the interim or limited regulations have been withdrawn. But the important bit is that those three clauses are still housed and under the draft regulations, so they can come back if they aren't challenged in their entirety. So that's definitely the reason we are still going there. And that requires support from the public as well. Just in public participation, the greater the numbers that we can present to government or to the courts, the more effective it will be. So anybody who hasn't had their say or who hasn't had their say in anything yet on these health regulations, please, I encourage you to actually go ahead and boost those numbers up. It's not for anything other than showing that there's a mass resistance against this, and the courts should listen to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No two ways about that. Daniel, maybe let me come to you then in that regard. Insofar as your clients and the legal action they were taking in that particular regard, are you guys, what's the plan of action here? Because I think Rob is quite right in saying there are legal precedents here that need to be challenged. There are certain powers here that are accorded to the minister shall decide, or the minister should do this. How about South African society, Parliament, consultation shall decide? What's the plan, and what are you guys looking to focus on here?
So, I mean, the long and the short is the gist of the case has sort of now disappeared, but the principal issue remains. And I think the biggest thing that will actually just change is the case will likely not be heard urgently. It will likely, just because it's not, there's no sort of pressing need for the court to give 3 judges to determine this important case. But I think it will probably continue in any case. And we should also bear in mind that it's not just one case; it's 4 cases that are being heard together, and a bunch of civil society organizations pushing for this. So I think that's the one important thing to point out. But I mean, the minister still denies that he did anything wrong, right? He's still of the opinion that the health regs were absolutely necessary, that he's just been acting completely, according to the advice he's received. So, I mean, the point is there's a legal question that really needs to be answered, and there is clarity, constitutional clarity, that needs to be provided. So we'll still debate it amongst ourselves and between the entire legal team and with the clients, obviously. But I mean, it's not just going to stop here. And I think the most important point, and this is what Rob was alluding to earlier, or mentioned it explicitly, was the regs that were repealed now, they contained in the draft regs that are still subject to public comment, right? It's basically similar. That's the one point. And the second concern is, you don't want a situation where the minister feels that these regulations can sort of be, flipped and switched on and off, right? Where, oh, now we need it, oh, now we don't. I mean, and that's the danger of how South Africa's been governed for the past 2 years, right? We've sort of been used to, for years, knowing that legislation takes years to be finalized. But we've lived under a de facto government where the government can literally, just by writing on a piece of paper, signing it and publishing it in the government gazette, then they govern our lives. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but have a look at that picture again. Have a look at the government gazette. It's literally a piece of paper that was scanned in and copied and pasted into the government gazette, right? It looks ridiculous, but that's how we've been governed for the past 2 years. That's been the reality. The only difference is now it's the health minister, and we're not sort of at the whims of Ms. Dlamini-Zuma anymore, at least. But the point being, we still need to get the clarity on this question. Did the minister act correctly when he decided in May to issue these regulations? And I think the answer is quite clearly no.
Absolutely. And, even as I say that, Gabriel, let me come to you, because the Institute of Race Relations, guys, you've been prosecuting this issue. You've been advancing sound arguments against the sort of abuses we're talking about here. And I suppose I need to pose that question directly to you guys. What are the campaigns you guys are busy with insofar as saying, hey, it may look like we have a current victory at the moment, but the power that they so relish is still in their hands, and we need to remove it. So what are you guys up to?
Yeah, so I mean, we had a couple of we raised, just on our side, over 35,000 signatures, I think it was, in the end, against various forms of lockdown abuse, quite specific kinds. But the last one had a very particular call, not just to end the lockdown, not just to disband the command council. I mean, another way of saying what Daniel was saying is we've been ruled literally by a command council in this country. Which really doesn't sound like a constitutional democratic way to go about things, but also to amend the Disaster Management Act so that we can't let this thing happen again. What does this thing cost us? The numbers are astonishing. 1.5 million jobs gone and not regained. And really, it is more like 2 million because the population grows. The labor force, working age population grows by 500,000 every year. So it's a huge amount of job losses. We were the world's highest unemployment rate on the World Bank record, and we then lost another 1.5 million jobs. In terms of COVID spread, outrageous, the fastest COVID spread in the world. So it's not like we traded the one for the other. We were the worst at spreading COVID and the worst at locking down to supposedly stop spreading COVID. We really just locked down the money. So in the court of public opinion, here's my campaign. I believe we had the world's worst lockdown. I believe that there were terrible, stupid abuses in Europe and in America and in many other places. But I think we were literally worse than everywhere else if you average it out over the whole period. And I'm going to keep trying to make that case because I think South Africans need to realize we weren't all in it together. A lot of countries didn't have it as bad as us because they weren't as badly abused. And in particular, what that means in terms of the law is we have to change the law because in 2024, good case scenario, the incumbents get voted out of power. I think in terms of accountability, a few of the other panelists have said, people have got to pay. I think Duma was saying it most eloquently. People have got to pay for the mistakes that they've made. Let's say that happens. Dude, you're replacing politicians with politicians. I'm very keen on coalition politics. They're still going to be politicians. So if the law says to a politician that you can take this much power, then the politician will take slightly more power than that. We have to change the law to rein it in. The Vryheidsfront Plus tabled a private members bill, which I read. I thought it was pretty good. I think it achieved a lot of the things that needed to be achieved in terms of that amendment. It was struck down. It didn't get much media time. We try to give it some attention. Partly the Vryheidsfront Plus is a niche party that's not very well liked by a lot of the media. But that idea was very good, and that idea will not die. We will not let that idea die. It has to go forward. It has to happen, and that's in the legal sense. In the broader sense, South Africans have to find a silver lining to this. I think there are a couple. One of them is that the shared national trauma, the only major shared national trauma this country had until now, was apartheid. And there was a tendency for opportunistic politicians to blame everything back on apartheid. Now, you can already see it's happening. They blame everything on COVID-19. The unemployment numbers, it's not bad policy, it's COVID-19. The cost of living crisis, inflation, it's COVID-19. And there is something absurd about many of those claims. Other countries, Argentina, Egypt, Brazil, so on and so forth, they got all of their jobs back that they lost. We are the ones who are still behind. So you can't just blame COVID-19. But at least we are sitting in a new country in a way. There's a new idea of a shared trauma that we have, which doesn't split us by race. And at the Institute of Race Relations, I think that's very important. I think people need to realize, however you look, we all share this country as citizens. That means we've got rights. You've got to inform yourself. What are those rights? Those rights were abused profoundly. You've also got a responsibility. And your responsibility as a citizen is to stand up and make your voice heard. There's this Latin phrase, and I'll finish with this. Ques custeres ipsos custataris. Now, I'm probably not saying that exactly right, maybe. The Latin lawyers can correct me. But it means, I know what it means. It means who guards the guardians? Who guards us against the abuses by the police and the army? Against the abuses by the politicians? Yes, civil society is a kind of conduit, but it really just means citizens, residents, people who are here, adults. It means if you're here and you've got a brain between your ears, you've got the capacity to be a guardian against the guardian's worst impulses. Mm-hmm. And I think that although it has taken too long, although it is so very late, it has happened. And it's happened during the winter. It's important. It would be a different story in the spring. It's happened clearly under pressure from ordinary citizens. Please, remember it, feel the joy of the victory so that we can keep fighting and win bigger victories going forward. Stay an active citizen.
And Dumo, let me come to you with that final word, guys. We've completely run out of time, so after Dumo, we're just going to do a quick round of how do the folks find you and how do they get to support your initiatives. Dumo, we're in that situation, you and I, perhaps as talk show hosts on online platforms, where we need to keep pushing that messaging to the people who listen to us, our loyal viewers, and those loyal viewers spreading our message to those who maybe don't watch us of hashtag don't be dribbled by these politicians. There is always more to it. There's always more utility, pardon me, for us as citizens. I like to talk about the faith, flag, family, freedom type South African, banding together to defend our liberties, banding together to defend our families, banding together to defend our rights from a political elite who are predatory in nature.
Right. I think, you're right about that, Sihle. I think we need to be not be dribbled by these politicians. You have to always be aware of what is going on, guys. I think that is very important. Politicians are not your friend. The government is not your friend. They don't look out for you. They only look out for themselves. People should understand that. The moment you understand that, then you'll know how to handle government properly. A lot of people during these lockdowns, they said, oh, yes, Uncle Cyril knows what he's doing. He's looking out for us. He cares about us. Didn't you see in one of his speeches, he shed a tear, he put on a mask, and I'm like, man, my goodness, Becky Cele was even crying today at that whole nightclub thing today. I mean, and again, rest in peace to those people who passed away. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean that he cares. It's all for show. I mean, you gotta look at the actions. One thing that I learned, one thing that I was told is that people are gonna judge you by your actions, not by what you say. And that's what did the government do? They had ample opportunity to end this lockdown. They didn't. They only responded when civil society put pressure. So it just shows you what their main interest is. It's power and to get more of it, and they'll never be satisfied, even when we are suffering. So that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That, of course, is Dumo Denga, host of the Man Petra Show. Dumo, let me actually begin with you in that sense. How do the folks find you, and what can we expect on the Man Petra Show Mondays at 7:30 p.m.?
All right. So we'll be back tomorrow, 7:30. It'll be the last show that we're doing for a while. And then if you want to just know more about Man Patriot, just go to manpatriot.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at Dumotenga.
Excellento. Brett Gabriel, how do the folks find the IRR and, of course, the podcast, the Daily Friend Show? How do the folks find y'all?
Please find us on the Daily Friend, dailyfriend.coza or irr.org.za. In terms of the medical industry, I just see, Sihle, the last comment that you put up there. It speaks to the other side of the big fight. Cyril Ramaphosa said, look how well we've done at managing the coronavirus. Now we are going to manage all healthcare in the country. NHI, 3 letters. Our biggest healthcare campaign at the moment is to oppose the NHI. Please, if you want to ruin this country, go and support the NHI. If you want to ruin this country, say nice, gently things about how maybe it'll work okay, like Adrian Gore. If you want to try and save South Africa from absolutely eviscerating the middle class, chasing anyone who can afford a plane ticket into another country so that they can get proper healthcare, if you want to stop that from happening, please support every campaign to oppose the NHI. It's a very, very terrible idea. And you'll find campaigns against that, places to sign up to make your voice heard, and places to find good information to justify what I'm saying in case you've got any doubts or you want to go and take that argument forward. Find it at the Daily Friend, find it at irr.org.za. Thank you.
Hey, tada. Speaking about groupings who allow people to have their say on these issues, and I'm pretty sure also on the NHI, they are allowing citizens to do exactly that, to have their say. Dear SA, Rob, what can we expect beyond that and more from you guys at Dear SA?
Well, there's always something going on at DSA. I mean, the government gazette comes out every Friday, and on every Friday and in every government gazette, there's some contentious issue, which we take notice of and build a campaign around that, just to create awareness with the public and to get them involved and used to getting involved in having their say and influencing their democracy. So if you want to get hold of us or have a say on anything and influence policy, create an impact, go to dearsouthafrica.co.za and find the latest campaigns and have your say. We've also got reports on closed campaigns, and there's over 300 completed campaigns which you can go through and see the work that we do. And it's, remember, we are just a vehicle for public participation. It's up to the public to make use of it, to drive it, to make sure that these things happen and make sure that the policies are influenced towards a favorable outcome. The most valuable contribution anyone can give to us is their participation and their voice. That is it. So dearsouthafrica.co.za, please go there, have your say.
Absolutely. Big thank you to Upra Rob in that regard. Daniel, the floor is yours for your last word insofar as how did the folks reach you guys at Herta Spies? Of course, the attorneys out you're in Pretoria. I keep saying that, right? You are in Pretoria.
Yes, indeed. Yes, we have offices in Centurion and Pretoria. People can just basically Google Herta Spies and they'll find us there, and they can find me on Twitter, although I'm less active on Twitter than I used to be at some point. It got me into trouble a few times, so I've decided to rather park that a bit, but they can still find me there.
Excellent. And with that being said, a big thank you to every single one of my guests as I get them off the screen and I get you, dear South African, into this little space that you and I enjoy at the end of every show. As I thank you for being with us on this journey from the very beginning, the jump, if you will. To an extent, I suppose I owe my show, not so much for the show, but like I owe its growth to an extent to the Spicy Coffee or really the response to it, because it has been you, dear South Africans, who joined me on this journey as we sought the truth, as we sought to push back against bad ideas from bad politicians in most cases. And I really must thank you guys for being a part of that journey. And I must say this, as at this point, very briefly, I'm not blind to the support that you guys have given me insofar as the numbers, the views, those who contribute monthly financially to the show. You guys have allowed me to get to this point now where I can announce that at the end of this month, we are expanding and we're growing the show. We are going to have some really, really cool stuff happen. So please look out for that at the end of the month where we make the official announcement. The Big Daddy Liberty Show is going to become a fully fledged channel, please God, as we grow it in that particular direction to serve you, the Faith Flag family and Freedom South African who has been with me on this particular journey. It's about time in this country that we build those media alternatives so that you stay informed with the compelling analysis you will not get anywhere else. So with that being said, a big thank you once again to all of my guests and the Friends panel tonight. And a big thank you to you, as I said, pardon me, for watching the show. I'll see you next week, Wednesday, for the BDL show. And until then, as I always say at the end of every show, never trust a commie.